First up is a secret summon interaction. Did you know you could make your Guardian of Faith chase enemies down and even follow you around? This supposedly immobile construct can actually learn to float around and hunt down your enemies, and even after combat ends, follow you around to your next fight, making the spell much better than before. To do this, all you need to do is give it some movement speed, and the easiest way to do that is by having Minthara cast Soul Branding on it. This grants the Guardian of Faith 5 meters of movement speed, even though the tooltip says 1.5 meters. Not only that, but Soul Branding will also remain on the Guardian of Faith for the full 3-turn duration because its attack is not actually a weapon attack. You can also cast Haste on your Guardian of Faith to grant it an additional 9 meters of movement speed to really get it moving, along with attacking twice per turn, of course. And although it's not a game-breaking combo, it's pretty amazing to see a Guardian of Faith, which is supposed to be immobile, float around, chasing your enemies down to slay them, and then follow you around like a pet after combat. And next up is one of the most perplexing secrets of Baldur's Gate 3, the 4 dead badgers within the Rivington campsite. These 4 badgers are found within a collapsed structure which is entirely untraversable. However, it is likely that these 4 badgers are actually referencing an old song called the Badger Song. The song says badger a bunch of times, and then mushroom twice, and then occasionally it says a snake. This song was referenced by Larian before in their video titled Baldur's Gate 3 Launch Party, an animated short, where Karlach describes a world of badgers as far as the eye can see, and you can see badgers dancing exactly like they did in the Badger Song. So we have the 4 badgers, and the mysterious hole in the ground below the building is shaped exactly like a mushroom as well. And not only that, but I did find 2 mushrooms within a burlap sack near the building, but I could not for the life of me find a snake to fully confirm this theory. But I'm pretty sure this is the explanation for those badgers based on Larian's reference to the song previously in their animated short. And next up is how to skip the Sorceress Sundry's Vault Door puzzle and get the Annals of Karsus and Tharkeite Codex without memorizing which doors to pass through. All you need is the spell Knock. Both the Elminster door and the Karsus door are simply locked, which means that you can just cast Knock on them, which unlocks an object that is held shut by a mundane lock, which is very surprising because you're in the vaults of Sorceress Sundries. You would not think they would just be using a mundane lock, maybe arcane lock, right? But you can just cast Knock and pass through the doors to get all the rewards, completely skipping the entire door puzzle. And next up is a secret power that Necromancy wizards have that everyone missed. Within Act 3, Necromancy wizards have a secret immunity to a curse that is applied to all party members called Spell Rot. Spell Rot causes you to receive 2d6 necrotic damage when you cast a spell per spell level, unless you are undead. Now, surprisingly, this curse is not applied to Necromancy wizards, even though there is no feature gained from their subclass that would suggest that they have immunity to this curse. Inured by Death grants resistance to necrotic damage and makes your HP max unable to be reduced, but it doesn't say anything about becoming immune to this curse or becoming undead, and honestly, I could not find anything that may be responsible for this hidden immunity. But alas, Necromancy wizards are immune to this curse. So next time you plan on taking on the Ancient Lair, bring your Necromancy wizard to make short work of the undead there. And next up is an item that is way better than you might think. Within the Arcane Tower's Chest of the Mundane lies an incredibly powerful item called Mystra's Grace. By bringing a Susu flower to the chest, or by simply looting it, the silverware will transform into their true form, revealing Mystra's Grace, which grants you the spell Featherfall. And while you might think, this isn't that great, this essentially grants you the spell for the remainder of the game. Featherfall, when cast outside of combat and outside of turn-based mode, will be a ritual spell and will not cost a spell slot. This means you can just drag these boots onto your hotbar and equip them anytime you would need Featherfall, cast the spell, then re-equip your standard boots. This makes these boots ideal for a party that doesn't otherwise have access to Featherfall. And next up are secret interactions with Mage Armour. Mage Armour can be used on a Cambion that has been summoned using Planar Ally Cambion to permanently increase your Cambion's armor class to 17. Now this works because the Cambion is not wearing armor, even if it appears to be, and not only that, but you can also cast Mage Armor on a Druid, and they will gain bonus AC in their shape-shifted form as long as the Druid is not wearing armor before shape-shifting, damaging, and as long as the shapeshifted form has a base AC of less than 13. So this would work on forms like Panther, Saber-toothed Tiger, and Bear, for example. And that's not all. Most impressive of all is probably the fact that Mage Armor works when the target is wearing a shield. This can result in an AC of around 18 for a target that's not even wearing armor, which is awesome. And Mage Armor's AC bonus even stacks with Shield of Faith, leading to 20 AC. With all these amazing use cases and combinations, Mage Armor is a spell that's probably overlooked considering how useful it can be. And next up is a newly discovered permanent damage increase buff that you can gain for your weapons that is super hidden. To gain this buff, you'll need to have a wild magic sorcerer in your party. They're the only ones who can provide this buff, which comes from their wild magic enchant weapons spell. This spell will enchant the weapon of each creature within 6 meters, causing their next attack to be a critical hit and deal an additional 1d4 force damage. However, if the sorcerer is the only one in your party who receives this condition, then you can pass the weapon that got enchanted to any other party member, and that weapon will keep the enchantment even after its next strike. In fact, it will be permanent. So you'll just need to unequip it before each long rest in order to maintain the enchantment. The reason this works is because after striking, the condition is removed from both you and the weapon. But if you don't have the condition, meaning you weren't near the sorcerer when he got that wild magic, then it can't be removed from the weapon. And the easiest way to get your wild magic sorcerer to trigger wild magic enchant weapons is by having him go away from the rest of your party and then cast Feather Fall repeatedly. I got pretty lucky and it only took about a minute or two to get this weapon enchanted, but since it's wild magic, your mileage may vary. And while it's just 1d4 force damage, it is pretty amazing that it can last forever. And next up is a secret interaction with Curving Shot. Curving Shot is an arcane archer bonus action that can be used after missing an attack to hit a nearby target instead. So when it's used with soul branding, the curved shot will actually gain the benefits of soul branding, dealing that additional 2d4 plus 1 fire damage, but it won't consume the condition, meaning you'll be able to deal that additional 2d4 plus 1 fire damage on your next attack as well and keep that movement speed, which is really, really cool. And while it's a very cool hidden interaction, chances are it won't happen too frequently because in order to trigger this, you have to miss your initial attack and already have soul branding in order to take advantage of this mechanic. So it's kind of cool, but probably nothing that can be exploited over and over. And next up is a secret interaction with Boo, Minsk's giant miniature space hamster. Now, it turns out when throwing Boo, every single companion has a unique line after making the throw. Some of my favorites are Gale and Astarion's lines. Astarion has a really funny line saying, "Go for the neck, Boo," because he's a vampire. So he also says, "Go, little rodent," which I love because I love calling my pet a rodent. Gale has a very Gale-like line saying "Pete oculos," which I think I'm saying right, which is Latin for attack the eyes or seek the eyes. At least that's what Google said when I looked it up. Gale also says this is a novel use for familiars, which is also kind of funny. Karlach has a line that says, "Go get 'em, boo-boo," which is adorable. And Jaheira has a line that says, "Land softly or the ranger will break me in half," kind of referencing their good relationship with each other. So overall, it's pretty cool that there are actually voice-acted lines for something that most players would probably never even try, which is so cool. And next up is an amazing interaction with the Circlet of Hunting. This very rare circlet grants a 1d4 bonus to attack rolls against creatures marked by Hunter's Mark, True Strike, Fairy Fire, or Guiding Bolt. However, what the description doesn't say is that it also functions with Hex. This makes this helmet great for an Eldritch Blast Warlock or Sorlock, since Eldritch Blast needs to succeed an attack roll to hit, and usually by the time you get the circlet from Araja Bloodra, your Eldritch Blast will be at least 2 blasts. Not only that, but since the 1d4 bonus to attack rolls only applies to the wearer if they are the source of the Hex, Fairy Fire, or other condition, it actually works perfectly on a Warlock. So next time you see Araja Bloodra on your Warlock, grab the Circlet of Hunting. And next up are a number of items that interact differently than the description says, and all of them happen to be related to Wrath. So the first item is the Line Breaker boots. These boots say that once per turn when you dash, you gain Wrath for 2 turns, turns, but what really happens is that you gain 3 turns of wrath when you dash, and you can gain this more than once per turn. So Linebreaker Boots, way better than it says. In fact, you can actually keep gaining 3 wrath for as many times as you dash, up to a maximum of 7 turns of wrath. Each turn of wrath grants +1 damage, which means a maximum of +7 damage is possible, which isn't game breaking for how many actions you're using. The second item that works differently than described is the Blood Guzzler Garb. This uncommon grants 1 turn of wrath when an enemy damages the wearer, or so it says, but instead it actually grants 2 turns of wrath, and this can be triggered only once per turn. So while it might be better for an encounter with a single enemy that only attacks once per turn, it's much worse against many attacks where you might think you can get lots and lots of wrath, but it's limited to only activating once per turn, so not really as good as described. The third wrath item that functions differently than described is the Cap of Wrath. The Cap of Wrath says that it grants 2 turns of wrath at the start of the wearer's turn if the wearer has 50% hit points or less. However, the description is not accurate, and the Cap of Wrath will only grant 1 turn of wrath at the start of the wearer's turn if they have 50% hit points or less. So this helmet is actually half as effective as described. Not only that, but for starting combat at 50% health, this bonus is really not worth it, making this helmet really not that great. And the last wrath item that does not work as described is the Enraged Heart Garb. This rare says that the wearer gains 2 turns of wrath while raging and also gains +2 constitution. And while the wearer does immediately gain 2 constitution upon equipping, the 2 turns of wrath that are promised to us upon raging never actually appear, not upon initial use of rage and not during start of turn while raging. The Enraged Heart Garb seems to not grant wrath at all, regardless of if you're raging, which could throw you into a fit of rage IRL, so I'd avoid this and the Cap of Wrath as 2 wrath items that are definitely not worth it, even if they might fit a build. And next up is an amazing interaction with Loviatar's Scourge. If you ever find yourself surrounded by a lot of low health enemies, such as the shadow-cursed ravens that ambush you in Act 2, Loviatar's Scourge is an incredible weapon to make short work of the murder of crows. Loviatar's Scourge passive deals an additional 1d6 damage to all nearby targets when you attack with the weapon. Since these ravens all clump up around you and also only have 1 HP, this weapon is perfect for this scenario. But be sure to have alert, otherwise you'll get surprised once the ravens descend and you could take some damage. And next up is how to completely skip the Gauntlet of Shar, skipping the Faith Leap, Self-Same, and Soft Step trials. To do this, you'll need to grab the Umbral Gem near your gear, since you still need to activate the lift. Once you have that, and optionally the Spear of the Night for Shadowheart, then take the lift down and just cast Knock on the large circular door. Now, surprisingly, this will work, even though you couldn't cast Knock on a previous door behind a puzzle earlier on, and Knock can be learned by a level 3 Bard, Sorcerer, or Wizard, or a level 8 Arcane Trickster or Eldritch Knight. And next up, you can actually switch places with anything using the Gloves of Dark Displacement sold by the Kobold in the Circus of the Last Days. The Gloves of Dark Displacement cause you to swap places with the target that you throw something at if they fail a dexterity saving throw. However, what this doesn't mention is that it is any target, even a door. So this can actually be used to circumvent locked doors by swapping places with it in order to get them out of the way. Now, in the case of the locked wardrobe in Act 3, it looks like it got pretty buggy, so it's probably not intended to be used this way. Also, it doesn't say this in the item tooltip, but you also need to actually deal damage to the target in order to trigger this effect. So I use the Dwarven Thrower, since most doorways and other objects aren't resistant to bludgeoning damage, making it easy to swap places with them. And this is just one cool use case for it. There's probably a lot of other really cool applications for the Gloves of Dark Displacement.